The sound is back. Did you all hear anything of what I was saying? Okay, sorry about that. Anyway, this is haha, no audio. Come on, I got some audio now, don't I? I got some audio. Tell me you can hear me. Give me a thumbs up, somebody. Hopefully you can hear me. Anyway, we had no audio still. Well, this is not good. Let's see what the deal is. Let me look. Supposed to be working. Oh, good. You're on. Okay, great. Thank you all. Sorry for the technical delays. You know, this running for Congress is hard enough, but now you've got to be able to be a sound engineer and a radio producer and a video producer, and good. I'm glad we got that taken care of. Okay, great. Anyway, yesterday or Tuesday, we had what appears to be a really well-run primary. Hi, Janaquin, how are you? Hi, Bill. Hi, Mark. We had what appears to be a really well-run primary. Now, there was one little kerfuffle at the end because apparently folks were trying to come in and vote and then got caught in a traffic jam outside the fairgrounds. Once they got inside the fairgrounds, there was plenty of places to park, but they got up to the door and it was late. So obviously that's a problem. Oh, hi, Roy. How are you? I believe that Charles Booker was able to get a court injunction to open up the door. And so I believe at about 25 past 6, the polls had closed at 6, they opened up and let everybody that was in. So it looked like it was maybe 75 or 100 people who looked like they weren't going to get to vote, but they did get to vote. So it looks to be very, very well run. Now, it's not finished yet, so we'll have to see how well they do with the reporting, but it's a fascinating race, and I hope you all are paying attention to it. Bill McNichol points out, hi, Barbara, how are you? Glad you're here. Bill McNichol points out, like he does every day, that it makes a huge difference for us if you're able to share the video to your Facebook friends. So if you just hit share, and you can even do a watch party. I'm not sure that I know the difference, and maybe we'll get Bill to explain that to us someday. But anyway, it makes a big difference. We're getting a lot bigger viewership, and we need this because we're going to be talking about not just getting elected, but we're going to be talking about the contract for rural America. How great is this that now you can read it? It's not backwards. Fingers crossed, I appear to have gotten the solution to the software, but that's just fingers crossed. Let's look at what we're doing. We normally look at some things on the daily side. So let's look at some numbers. I'm going to start all the way up here, though. This is the USA from yesterday. So this is numbers for the USA. And notice that new cases number, 38,386. So we are not out of the woods, folks. In fact, it's getting a lot worse. And we talked yesterday about how Europe, or maybe it was the day before, Europe is now debating whether they will let Americans into Europe when they open up for travel. So our nation has really, really not done well dealing with this pandemic. In fact, a few days ago we talked about how Germany did so well that if we had done as well as they did, 70% of our people that have died, which by the way right now is just short of 125,000 people, 70% of them might still have lived. But if we had done as well as Singapore, for example, 99% of our people might still be alive. So we've really done a terrible job with this virus, and now it appears that the government is kind of giving up. I think we're just giving up, and it's a shame. But I hope you all will take the message and take care of yourselves. Wear that mask. I think that masks are going to be required. Actually, in California, they are required. Now let's look at Texas, because Texas is our new number one. I think this is their first time in a while that they've been number one in new cases, over 6,000 cases. But Florida's right there with them, and so is California. So really, really terrible. We're going to look at this little chart that I got from Naked Capitalism, and I've got to move my face out of the way so you can see it. But notice that that compares Europe and the United States. And all the way down at the bottom, notice China. Now, there's some question about whether China is telling the truth, but they definitely are being very aggressive at dealing with this virus. So if their figures are accurate, then there we go. I want to show you a little bit of important news, some important news here. This is the headline. Amazon creates a $2 billion climate fund as it struggles to cut its own emissions. So they had a press release yesterday. They said that they've set up a new $2 billion fund that's going to focus on startups that would help it and other businesses achieve net zero emissions by 2040. Now, 2040, hi Brenda, how are you? Glad you're here. 2040 is not that far away, but it's also not that close. And net zero emissions means that they'll presumably put they'll pull the same amount of carbon out of the air that they put into the air, or that the way that they get their energy and the way that they do their transportation will be carbon neutral. And they're going to do this across a wide array of industries, including transportation, energy generation, energy storage, batteries, manufacturing, materials, and agriculture. And Amazon, Jeff Bezos, if you're listening, I have a suggestion as well. I think you all need to focus. And where's my, I have a whole, I have something to show Jeff Bezos. See these things? When you order something from Amazon, they come in and it might only have a little thing in it. You know, might have just some little thing. Well, it's perfectly reusable. It seems to me that Amazon should, when they deliver you something, say, hey, do you have any of these envelopes left over? And they could reuse them. I'd be happy to get reused packaging. That would be a massive thing. You know, we're all about the, you all know, remember the Nope button? Let me see if I can find the Nope button. There's the Nope pin. That means no plastics in my environment. And the idea of that is that it reminds you to stop buying things with single-use plastic in it. Hi, Dennis. How are you? I'm glad you're here. So, for example, when you're buying soft drinks, don't buy them in plastic bottles. Buy them in aluminum. Aluminum can be recycled more or less endlessly, but plastic really can only go once. And the plastics, of course, are not biodegradable. So if you make the effort, you can do things like buying milk in cartons rather than in the plastic jug, which only get one. Oh, Barbara got one of these envelopes today with a new iPhone in it. Well, congratulations on the iPhone, I guess, but or an iPhone case. But this only gets used one time, and then what are we supposed to do with it? You know, so that's the purpose of the Note pin. Anyway, back to Amazon. I got a little distracted. We'll look back at their headline. Anyway, hundreds of workers in part of this is because the Amazon workers walked out on the company last September to join a global climate strike. So they're trying to get Amazon to take more aggressive steps. Now, this is all good news, but we have to be real about it. We've got to keep it 100, right? Amazon has plenty of work to do reducing its own emissions, which rose 15% last year to more than 50 million metric tons. Terry Thomas is here. She says glass over plastic. Yes, I try to buy glass. I mean, glass can be recycled, but a lot of times recycling places don't want to take it. But we've really got to move this direction. Critics will also note that Amazon, which posted nearly $12 million in profit last year, and they've got nearly $30 billion in cash on hand, could easily afford to invest far more than $2 billion on their problems. And of course, they would be right. All right. Now, a gentleman left a message or left a comment. A guy named David Royce left a comment about addiction and wanted me to talk about addiction. It is, of course, one of the pieces of Contract for Rural and Working America, number 9, I think. Abuse prevention, rehab, and support. We deal with drug addiction in a very poor way here in the United States. Unfortunately, we still are doing the war on drugs, which, you know, besides making some folks who work on that war on drugs very wealthy, it's not really been that effective. And sometimes we're so far behind the tide or behind the times as to the way things are going, that we get caught by surprise. For example, you all are aware of the opioid crisis, which was, much of it was prescribed addiction. And what a terrible thing that was. Well, when the U.S. government cracked down on OxyContin, now the bad news is that people who really needed it suddenly couldn't get it. And I have friends that went through just terrible times because where they were used to getting enough for 30 days, they could only get enough for 7 days. And these were people who actually needed it because they had back surgery or something. They were going to be in pain for the rest of their lives, and the OxyContin is ideal for that. But, I lost a tooth. And when the tooth was extracted, they gave me OxyContin. I was going to be alone by myself, and I never used it. Ibuprofen was okay, because I'm afraid of that stuff. But a lot of people did go ahead and use it. And I've spoken to families that, had a dad who got injured or a daughter who fell and hurt her hip and was prescribed Oxy. And the next thing, you have a family member who, was the young lady that I heard about was on the dean's list at University of Louisville, but got addicted to OxyContin, and she now lives on the street, and the family can't even approach her. And the husband of the woman I met in the eastern counties, I want to say in Jessamine County, told me about her husband gotten injured at work, prescribed with OxyContin, and he got addicted to it. And she ultimately moved out with the kids because he had gotten out of control, and within a year he had passed away. And this was a man who was a perfectly fine human being, a good husband, was supporting his family. They were both working, everything was going really well. And OxyContin took his life. So we've done a poor job with dealing with addiction. And a lot of times what happens, I think we all have been touched by this. We've either got a friend or a family member, or we've heard about someone who's in our social circle who's gotten addicted or had a child that's gotten addicted. So it affects all of us. And when we treat this as a criminal offense, I believe that's the wrong approach. Locking people up because they are using drugs does not really solve the problem. And it's one thing if you're high on meth and you break into someone's house, you should be punished for any criminal acts that you do, but the act of being high shouldn't be criminal behavior. It should force you maybe into rehab. But I know of people that had been in prison and were out on probation, and part of the terms of their probation were they weren't allowed to use drugs, and got pulled over for a headlight that was dead, and they did a drug test on him and found out that he had been high, and they sent him back to prison. And that's exactly the wrong answer. We have to treat addiction and these drug problems like a health care problem. We, unfortunately, because our healthcare system is so focused on profit, we are now looking to the same companies that addicted us for solutions to the addiction problem. And in fact, the guy I'm running against, my opponent, whose name is Brett Guthrie, he sponsored legislation last year to approve a brand new class of drugs that are to be used in rehab. But there are other ways of doing this. And by the way, that was a multi-million-dollar lobbying exercise, and I believe his former chief of staff was one of the lobbyists. So it's just, one hand washing the other. It goes on and on. Now, I've spoken with people who run rehab facilities, and I asked what their success rate was, and they have a success rate of around 17 to 22%. Now, in Amsterdam, in Holland, they treat addicts a little bit differently, and there's a good side and a bad side to this. And it's a little bit controversial, but it's one the United States should consider. And that is, if you're addicted to drugs, you can apply to the government, and they will give you a daily set of doses that are administered by doctors or by medical staff. You show up at an office in the morning, you get your morning dose. You show up in the evening and get your evening dose. Now, that's all they do. They provide a safe place and a safe dose that you can count on. And the first thing that it does is it stops deaths by overdose. They have something like, 1 death per million or something exceptionally low. In fact, it might have been 1 death in 11 million population. Where, for example, in West Virginia, at the height of the opioid epidemic, they had 347 deaths per million people in the state of overdose. So first of all, they're able to cut the death rate, which is a wonderful thing. But that's all they do, and addicts are a little bit ticked off about that. They still want some help getting off the drugs. But one of the side effects is people whose supply is certain, they know they're going to be able to get this, 25% of them are able to get off the drugs. They're able to wean themselves off of their habit. So imagine how much better we could do if we actually helped them. So that's one way that we need to move forward. Now, let's be clear. There will be no simple answers to drug abuse. There will be no simple answers to drug addiction and overdoses. But in fact, it's going to be a combination of things. And not only that, the people who need support are not just the addict. It's the addict's family. It's their friends. Addicts that, people who get seriously addicted affect almost 3 other lives besides their own. So these are families. If you've had someone in your family with an addiction to opioids, for example, you know that it's more than one family can handle. So I think that's a really long answer, but I hope that's okay with David Royce. I don't notice him being on, but I told him I would talk about it today. So that's where I'm at on drug abuse. And we do need to find ways to do a better job of that. I'm also, by the way, in favor of legalized cannabis, because states with legal cannabis have a much better rate of, a much lower rate of use of painkillers and of overdose and of addiction. So they have lower deaths. I think California is a place that has their death rate, their overdose rate is like 110 per million, right? Versus in Kentucky, we're something like 275, 280 per million. So, okay, well, let's move on to the big thing I wanted to talk to you about today, and that is this story. And I posted this on the homepage, my homepage, because this is a very important article, and I sent it out to some friends saying this is a must-read article, and I really strongly suggest you go look. It's Der Spiegel, which is international, which is a German newspaper, magazine, and website, and they're interviewing 2 economists, Angus Deaton and Anna Case. And millions of Americans have seen their wages stagnate for decades, even as the wealthiest have grown fantastically rich. These 2 economists believe that the healthcare system is partially to blame, and that the coronavirus is highlighting the broader dangers that American society is facing. Brenda says Europe seems to do a lot of things better than us. Yes, they do, unfortunately. We do some things better than them. But yes. We're in crisis right now. Our system is failing. And another way of looking at it is we have a lot of opportunities to make things better. And that's why I'm running for Congress. I'm working to get elected, and I will do whatever I can to make things better, particularly for working people, for people who live in rural America. Please, go to the website and download your own copy. Anyway, this couple, they're actually a couple, and I believe he's a Nobel laureate. Angus Deaton is a Nobel Prize winner. Here's their quote: "We're against people getting rich by burdening other people." The pandemic, they say the pandemic is revealing that the U.S. healthcare system is a mess. It was a mess before the pandemic, but the pandemic is showing how big the problem is. Insurance in the United States, your health insurance is tied to your employment. And then we've just had 30 million people lose their jobs almost overnight. So now we've got millions of people without health insurance. The United States spends a lot of our GDP. They say 17%. I've seen figures significantly higher, like closer to 19%, but let's use their number. 17% of our gross domestic product is spent on healthcare, and this is more than any other nation in the world. We are, unfortunately, number 1 in costs. But we also have the lowest life expectancy of any rich country in the world. This is why, by the way, I support some sort of universal health care system. Medicare for all, fine. That's an existing system that we could modify. But there are a lot of other countries that do a better job than us that we could copy. And I love one of the French things is called solidarity, and it means that the sicker you get, the less you pay. If someone in your family gets sick, the way it is today, if someone in your family gets cancer, you're likely to lose your house. You're likely to lose your life savings. In France, when you get sick with cancer, you stop paying bills. And I spoke to a Frenchman whose dad had gotten cancer, and he said it was terrible. It was 4 years of treatments, but he said, we never paid a bill. And we think it is barbaric in the United States that you all let people lose their homes and their savings. They go on to say the first person to compare the healthcare industry to a tapeworm. It's a pretty harsh term. You're a tapeworm. Warren Buffett said that. Warren Buffett, one of the big investors, a famous investor here in the United States. Now they use the example of Switzerland. Switzerland has the second highest healthcare expenditures. And they say they spend about 12%. Again, I've heard a higher figure. I've heard 15% for Switzerland. But on average, the Swiss live 6 years longer than Americans. And Janikin is saying, where do you see the U.S. in how many months? In 6 months? Well, for one thing, I see a different president in the White House, and hopefully recovery of the Senate by maintenance of the House, and we need to take the Senate as well. Democrats, it's all hands on deck time. There's no fooling around. You got to really focus on making this happen. You got to show up to vote. You got to bring everybody you know. And so that's, once we get that dealt with, we're going to be dealing with the virus for quite some time. I believe even if President Trump is reelected, I hope he isn't, but if he is, I think he's out of options. I think they're going to have to go to some sort of, at least, COVID care for all. They have done everything to avoid that. By the way, if you show up and you say, hey, I want a COVID test, and they say, well, hang on, before we give you that, what are your symptoms? And you start talking about your symptoms, and they say, oh, you need a chest x-ray. Oh, you need this test. Oh, you need this. Well, and then they run your test and they tell you you're negative. Your expenses won't be covered as it is right now. We have another friend that we shared, in fact, I shared his story, the pilot who wound up in the hospital for 9 or 10 days, I believe. And they never were able to get a positive test out of him, but his doctors told him, you absolutely had the virus. That's absolutely what you had. But the testing is for shit. Hope you're not offended. It's just what it is. The testing sucks right now. We're not doing a good job of testing. Bad news, by the way, from China. They've got a lab there that says it looks like the antibodies don't last very long. So we are going to be waiting until there is some sort of vaccine. In the meantime, got to wear the mask. That's another way to snuff this out, is to, contact trace and test people. You've got to test them, and you got to keep track of people when they get sick, who they've been in contact with. I'm going to go back to this story about the despair is smoldering in society. So anyway, if we followed the example of Switzerland, we'd save about $1 trillion. If we had a ferry, they say it this way, if there were a magical ferry, it could suddenly make us as efficient to the level of Switzerland, then we could save $1 trillion, and that's money we could spend on all kinds of other things. And they also want to make it clear, and I want to make it clear, I am not attacking doctors or nurses or people who work in hospitals. We're not attacking them. They are not the problem. But the problem is the expense. And it's putting pressure, the expense is putting pressure on working Americans. Working class Americans are under a lot of pressure right now, and it's probably why they voted for President Trump. Because honestly, Democrats haven't been taking care of them, and neither really have Republicans. But President Trump at least acknowledged them. He said, I recognize you, I see you. And that's important. People need to feel that they're being seen and heard. Now, he hasn't actually accomplished anything that really helps them, but they do. A lot of them still support him. Anyway, a family policy last year cost $20,000. If you're getting paid 30 grand a year, which by the way is $15 an hour full time, your employer's having to pay that 20 grand. Well, they may say, you know what, we're just going to automate the position. You've been a cashier, we're going to automate that position. So, the rates keep getting higher, and the corporations keep cutting back on hiring low-wage workers. The cost of healthcare, our system of financing it, all of this becomes a wrecking ball to the less educated labor market. And we need the less educated labor market. Look, how many of us now are relying on people that bring us our food, that they bring the food to the grocery store? We're able to go to the grocery store and buy food. Those people are on the front line. And I've got friends and family doing it, that are working in these positions. I have a relative who's a pharmacist who's working in the local hospital here. And she's in a hospital where the virus is present, so it's nerve-wracking for them. Anyway, look at all the people that we rely on now, the people who deliver food, the people who bring you your Amazon package. We're back to Jeff Bezos. Let's recycle these, please. You can do it, man. He only got $140 billion. And you know what? I don't mind him having that money as long as the rest of us get to earn a decent living, get married, have a family, buy a house, maybe save for our retirement, be able to put our kids through school, maybe occasionally go on vacation, and maybe buy a boat or something like that. We're not asking for much, and it's fine. You all can be rich, but people down here at the bottom of the socioeconomic ladder, they need to have a dignified life, and if they've got that, they're good. I had a friend who used to say things like, people who are so focused on money, they know more about money than I do. That's a little bit of a sarcastic statement. You might have to think about that one. It took me a while to think about it. Our mortality rate is a measure of how well our healthcare is doing. Hi, Carrie. How are you doing? Good to see you. We've been seeing that our mortality rate is actually increasing. Now, we may have recovered that back just a little bit, but especially for older white working men that are non-skilled laborers, they are dying. The rate that they are dying is accelerating. Their life expectancies are shortening. And they're dying from drug overdoses, from alcoholic liver disease and suicide. These are all deaths by their own hand. And so these are deaths of despair. And these have all risen dramatically since the 1990s. This is why we have the Contract for Rural and Working America, because we need to take care of working people, and we need to do the right thing here in rural America as well. Here's one of their great quotes. I'll go back here for a sec. If despair due to the hollowing out of the white working class wasn't there, the drug epidemic would be much smaller. The despair is smoldering in society, and this created an opportunity for the pharmaceutical industry, an industry that is not appropriately regulated, which makes the situation with opioids much worse. At the height of it, there were enough prescriptions for every American to have a month's supply. It was essentially legalized heroin. So, obviously terrible. And here's their interesting quote. I don't know if I agree with this, but I'm afraid they might be right. They say, he says, there are two ways of getting rich. One is by making things, and the other is by taking things. We certainly see that. Anyway, I would really like to encourage you to read that article. It was really, really something. I'm kind of skipping through it. Here's another quote. They were asked about President Trump, and their answer is that President Trump, like inequality, is not the cause. He's a consequence of what's going on. He's a consequence of it. Trump is not the problem. He's a problem, but he's not the problem. Yeah, Billy is asking you all, please, if you haven't done it, please save this video today and I've gone on way too long. And very soon, by the way, I'm going to be on Terry Miner's show on WHAS 840, and I think there's a link to that on the website, on the Facebook page as well. So I just want to thank you all for being here. It's such we are on the verge of lots of change in our world. We're going to have lots of changes coming along, and we've tried all sorts of solutions. We've tried, letting the market fix it. We've tried letting, focusing on trickle down, and we found that trickle down doesn't really work. It never really has. So we're going to need new ideas, and we're going to need new people in our government to take care of this. People that are not beholden to corporations, but that are beholden to the citizens of the district. Oh, thank you, Billy, who's posted the link. Anyway, that's why I'm running for Congress, is to try and make a difference. And we can make the biggest difference in a district like the 2nd. Because if we can convince rural and working people that Democrats once again have their back. We Democrats used to be the party that kept Wall Street in line, that kept the banks in line, and they used to stand up for working people. Well, we need to do that again. We've lost our way a little bit, and it is time for Democrats to reclaim the high ground here and focus on doing right by working people and doing right by people in rural America. We'll be talking about this more and more as we get closer to November. I really appreciate your help. If you can throw me a couple of bucks, you can go to the website, hankforkentucky.com. Thank you, Jennifer, and hope to see you all tomorrow. Your contributions make a big difference, and it really helps. And sharing the video makes a big difference as well. All right. I hope you all have a great day, and I will look forward to seeing you tomorrow, which I'll be back at 3:30 Central, 4:30 Eastern. That's the last day of the week for me. After that, I get to have a glass of wine. So maybe you all can join me at the very end. We'll pour a glass of wine. All right. I love you all. I'll talk to you later. I hope you have, like I say, I hope you have a great weekend.